Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, with show number 178 of the ongoing saga of desperation, madness, and despair. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's well. Was in Las Vegas with my beautiful bride last week. Had a really great time and been on the road, I think, the week before that, too. Yeah, so here we are back again. I hope everybody's doing well. And I'm trying to think what the big update would be for now, and I just sure can't think of anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I have a feeling I'm going to try and move mail real quickly this week. Oh, I remember there's something I can chat about. There's a person I'd like to get involved with professionally in terms of getting some of the message spread. Reason I need to keep the show short tonight is I need to call him after the show's over and he's on the East Coast. But they linked my guns video, which is about 5 years old, on a Facebook page. And I think in 6 days, it did 33 million views, which is my entire career, basically. You know, I think it's probably 40 million career views over my life, something like that. And then to have one go to 33 million in 6 days is really what I needed, to be honest with you, more than anything. This, Alfonso Rachel pointed this out first. This suppression, that they're doing, just so you can see the shirt, by the way. There you go. This suppression of views by Facebook and YouTube really is an effective way to demotivate people like me, because you were doing routinely doing million views, or at least in the high hundreds of thousands, and then it goes to the low hundreds of thousands, and then very quickly it goes to 20 or 30,000. I mean, I've got do I have 100,000? I guess it's 100,000 YouTube subscribers, and I'll post a video, gets seen by 16,000 people, and it's just over weeks, and it's just heartbreaking. And it really does work. It not only does it work to prevent the message from getting out, but it's just a very hard thing to bear, because this is basically the reason you do the work, is to get it seen by people, and the reason the members have been members through thick and thin is to get the message out. So it's very alarming. But the person who did the actual boosting of this thing is one of those just Facebook geniuses, social media geniuses, and a really good guy. Who's been real quick to defend me and so on. And so in any event, I was pleased to see that. So we'll see if we can put together some kind of an arrangement where we can continue to do something like those kind of numbers, because that's just a shot of vitamins that I needed real badly, to be honest with you. 33 million views, maybe higher now. That's my highest ever single that I was aware of. Biggest number I ever saw in one place was 2.5 million. So, 10 times my best previous thing, and so I was very, very pleased about that. So, in any event, we're gonna continue to do that, and since the guy's a social media guy, I'd like to get a hot topic for the weekend. Go ahead and do that. But anyway, I keep talking about all this other stuff, and we'll see. But I certainly needed it, so that was good. So I do have to move pretty quickly today, and so I don't have a whole lot of other updates to give you, to be perfectly honest with you. Nothing comes to mind anyway. So why don't we just leap right into the questions? And here we go. Top question is from Daryl Green, and he writes, what do you think about Trump embracing restriction on our Second Amendment rights? Many FUDs think this is solely about banning bump stocks, but it's not. The wording proposed can be interpreted to ban so much more. Daryl, not a whole lot of times this happens, but this is one of those times I just don't know anything about what he said. I mean, I can give you my gut reaction on it. Do not infringe means, shall not be infringed upon means shall not be infringed upon. But if you're gonna ban automatic weapons, which are banned, they're certainly banned in California. I just plain also don't know whether a fully auto AR-15 or something like that is legal anywhere. I just don't know the answer to that. But the bump stock is essentially it's a poor man's automatic weapon conversion. The thing that's most striking to me about all of this that you hear from the progressives, and we're not going to get too deep into this unless I get another question on it. We've made this argument 100,000 times. I just made it earlier today with this clown who, had the nice, had the decency to come and say, "I hope you or somebody you love dies in a mass shooting." I know there are people out there with different opinions than me about this, and I think they're really, really wrong. But I'm quite sure that I've never wished that on anybody. I don't want really evil people to, like Michael Moore, and I don't want anybody to die, and I don't want anybody to die because I disagree with them. But that's the tolerant and progressive left that we've come to know and love. So let me just say this: the thing that's so frustrating about the whole argument is when you hear these people saying, well, geez, we ought to make it harder for crazy people and felons to get guns and all of these laws that we need to have. And time again, you just have to explain to people, these laws are already on the books, I mean, they're already there. And I guess it's just not dawning on people that people who are willing to go in and commit mass murder are also willing, apparently, to violate gun laws. Does that thought not draw any water with people? Does it just... I keep coming back to this. It's like, well, we're going to make a law to make it harder to murder people, when my point is, look, if you're ready to murder somebody, it's pretty much the top dog, right? I mean, murder's your ace. So it's the four aces of crime. Premeditated mass murder is about as far out on a moral limb as you can go. And I simply don't understand the mentality that says that we're going to pass a law that's going to make it easier to accomplish this act when you're determined to accomplish this act in the first place. As I said before, it's like assuming that somebody's going to be deterred by this is a restricted parking zone, or you can't park there. That's a handicap spot. Don't you realize that's against the law? Well, yeah, I do, actually. But since I'm going to go into the school and gun down everybody I can find, I don't think I'm really too worried about that. Again and again and again, it needs to be said, the reason so many people have such a knee-jerk reaction about this is they want something to be done, and they want something to be done that is something that can be just legislated, like, ta-da, if only we could get these Republicans to pass reasonable gun control legislation. There's already reasonable gun control legislation. And before there was reasonable gun control legislation, there were no mass shootings. I'm sorry that it's inconvenient for your philosophy, but that's true, and everybody knows it's true. There was no restrictions on gun ownership for the huge portion of this country's history. And I'm not saying that the restriction on gun ownership caused the mass shootings. What causes the mass shootings is twofold. It's first and foremost, not my opinion, Park Dietz, forensic psychologist who studies these things, made it crystal clear that if you want to stop these mass shootings, then you need to stop mentioning names and showing pictures and doing body counts. This guy in Florida had the most chilling thing ever. He said he was reading about a previous mass shooting, and he said, quote, "I can do so much better." It's a contest for people who've not been allowed to compete in baseball. So the whole, we need to restrict more guns and therefore get rid of the mass shootings things it's obviously wrong on its face. There were no restrictions at all before. As I said, walk into a hardware store with whatever money you have, and you carry out as many guns as you want to. We never saw this kind of thing. So it's 24/7 news coverage of these people that gives them incentive to go out in a blaze of glory and body counts, just like this kid. By the way, whose name I know and will not mention. You'll never hear me mention the name of any of these other people either. And more to the point, it's the progressive destruction of the moral fiber of this country. Now, let me be clear by what I mean about that. I'm not saying that these lunatics wouldn't have been lunatics in an earlier time, because murderers have been here forever, and so have crazy people. But what I'm talking about when I say you destroy the moral fabric of the country and you get more and more of these is you get more and more people on the margins. So you're just dealing with a percentage game, a numbers game. But more importantly than that, you don't have any of the preventative mechanisms that used to exist in this country, let's say 50 years ago. In other words, if you're going to destroy families, if you're going to take fathers out of the family, for whatever well-intentioned purposes you might have about aid to single mothers and so on. But the fact is, marriages and families are falling apart. The number of single parent homes are highest than they've ever been, and everybody knows it's a prime direct correlation of, between violent criminals and fatherless boys and all the rest of it. But even deeper than that, it's like who would have caught this guy if this had happened when I was a kid, let's say in 1973. Let's just say this guy was in school in 1973 when I was in school. What would have been different? Would anything have been different? I maintain absolutely yes, it would have been different. In 1973, you had more strengthened families, which again doesn't mean that you're not going to have crazy murdering people being born, but it means you're going to at least be close enough to them to know. The two Columbine shooters that started this whole thing, of all the horror involved in Columbine and everything it caused, the part of it that just simply beggars belief is when the parents of both of those mass murdering bastards said they were building bombs, by the way, stacking ammunition, stacking weapons, walking around in their black trench coats, fascinated with the Matrix. And the parents said, we had no idea that this was coming. We simply had no idea. Well, you should have had an idea. You should have had an idea. If your children are so messed up that they're building pipe bombs and storing ammunition and preparing to go and gun down as many people as they can, I simply refuse to believe that you are not aware that there's a problem with your kids. I don't believe it. I believe you want to get it off your shoulders psychically, but I don't believe it. So would church have caught this guy? Or even more importantly, and this is the entire theme of Scott Ott's Right Angle, which I simply forgot to do the thumbnail for, so it's going to be up tomorrow. Should have been up today. But Scott Ott's entire point is this, or is so much of the problem really that we think that the solution is to get together and pass a law that these students are calling for gun legislation, and they're starting hashtags, and they're starting Facebook pages, and they're petitioning Washington, and they're doing all this. They're waiting for somebody out there to pass a law to protect them from this stuff. And there is no law that's going to protect you from this. There never has been, and there never will be. Your best protection against this is to understand that lunatic who you've been sitting next to for 15 years or whatever is in fact a serious psychopath and needs to be dealt with. And again, I want to repeat everything I said in this in Scott's show, but look, if you think that having the FBI investigating everybody is going to solve this problem, you're wrong. You don't want to live in a world where the FBI investigates everybody all the time. Trust me on this. So what would be appropriate? What can you do while preserving your civil liberties and all the rest of it? What would have been appropriate? Well, if a guy is making threats that he's going to kill somebody, or if he's just talking in those same general kind of terms, then if it were me, I would say to my kids, if I had kids, you hear that kind of talk, you come talk to me about it. You hear somebody saying something like that, before you do anything else, come talk to me, tell me what they said. And if I listen to a child of mine saying, yeah, Johnny was talking about how he was going to get a gun and shoot up school, or he wants to be a professional school shooter or something like that, I would make a pretty rapid decision to get in touch with the principal of that school that day and sit down with the principal and say, well, if you're not going to call the police or the FBI on this guy, I'm going to. Now, this guy got called. Apparently, officials visited his house 39 times, something like that. The FBI dropped the ball on this guy. Listen, this is not any comfort to the people who are dead out there because of this, but on some level, we have to. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept the fact that on some level, mistakes like that happen. That's not. I'm not trying to be flip or cold about it. On the contrary, I'm just saying it's human nature. It's sometimes people just make mistakes. They just slip up. They don't. Sometimes somebody gets a blood transfusion of the wrong type and somebody dies, and that's not good. And it's not like we shouldn't try and stop it, but at some level, you have to accept the fact that sometimes things just go wrong. And so, for the FBI to drop the ball, that's one thing. But for 39 calls or 39 visits from either law enforcement or juvenile or something to this guy, and he's still walking around out there. I mean, that's your problem. And we refuse to accept that we refuse to accept the complexity of this issue. That's why people want to just throw guns in a certain kind of gun, you know. It's just a certain kind of gun. Let's throw the AR-15 away. I don't mean to be, this, like this kind of coldly rational about something this awful. But honestly, if you are going inside a building and your goal is to kill as many people as possible, I think you'd be far more effective with a handgun than you would with a rifle. It's certainly easier to block a rifle. It's certainly easier to move out of the way of a guy who's trying to swing a rifle than rather with a guy who's got a bunch of handguns. And as David Wellman points out here in the comments section here, accept the fact that evil exists. And now we're down to the brass tacks of it. Because everybody's screaming about safety and safety, and we got to be safe, we've got to be safe. How do we make ourselves safe from this? Well, you don't. You can't. This is it. This is the rock bottom problem for progressives and for certain people who simply cannot face it. They can't face it. They cannot face the fact that they are not safe and they never will be safe, and no one is safe and no one ever will be safe. That safety is a relative condition, and that unless you happen to live in a neighborhood which has been governed by Democrats for 150 years, like an American inner city or something, then the typical American life is astonishingly safe, unbelievably safe. 20 years now, or whatever it is, 19, 18 years without a single airline fatality on a U.S. carrier. I just don't know what to tell people. Ohio Coastie points out it's cargo called it is. It's magical thinking. We throw the gun into the volcano and the murder god is appeased, and then then we don't have any problems anymore. It just doesn't work like that. And this goes to the heart of what's so wrong with this Western society today, as expressed primarily by progressives, is the success of everything that we've accomplished has led people to believe that there is simply no excuse for dying other than in your sleep at age 103, surrounded by loving relatives. Anything other than that is a moral outrage, and there's got to be some law, some legislation. And so we try to legislate ourselves into everything, and legislate ourselves out of these facts that murders exist. We're going to legislate ourselves out of medical accidents, out of car accidents. We're going to sue everybody and everything. And as long as we keep suing people and lawyering people and adding new laws, then we'll be safe. But it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work like that. The world is not your personal cradle. and it owes you nothing. And your safety and the safety of your family, I hate to break this to you, is your responsibility. We have a shared responsibility as a society, but ultimately, your safety is your responsibility. And if you take it down to the absurd, which is what you have to do to make a point to these people, apparently, if you take it down to the absurd, you have to basically say to people, and when I say your safety is your responsibility, what I mean by that is when you're driving down the road in your car at 60 miles an hour, and the only thing that's separating you from pretty much instantaneous death is a yellow line that's painted down the side of the road, you're responsible for staying on your side of that yellow line. There's not going to be a force field there to protect you against you not being responsible for your own safety. Furthermore, you also have to have a responsibility to understand that even though you may not go over that yellow line, you can't guarantee that the person who's coming your way isn't going to go over his yellow line. And so your safety requires that you have to be aware of the fact that this could happen at any time and be ready. And this is called defensive driving. And you don't have to do it. Most people don't do it. But the people that do it, as a rule, live longer. Because I do it. And I've been in one fender bender. I don't know how many people I know have been in major accidents. I'm always aware of where I'm going to take this car. If this car jumps the line, or if somebody slams on the brakes, or if I get rear-ended, I'm always thinking about it. It's just automatic. You can train yourself to do this. This whole situational awareness thing, the idea of where am I going to go? What's going to happen? What I'm going to do if this car starts to drift over the line? You start thinking about this way, and you don't have to think about it every second. It simply becomes habit. You walk into a restaurant and you look around. I don't think anything about it. I don't go into every single restaurant every single time I go out and scan the audience, and looking for people who, No, but I am aware of what's going on in that restaurant. And I have just in the space of a glance, I can be aware of the fact that situation over there looks a little dicey. There's something about that guy who's standing out by the newspaper stand that just doesn't look quite right to me. I'm not going to call the cops on him, but I'm not going to just walk past him blindly either. This is, whose responsibility is this? I mean, honestly, seriously, when you get down to it, if we don't understand this fundamental thing, then we need to have retractable steel covers on every single electrical outlet in every single house and office in the entire country, because if we don't accept the fact that it's our responsibility to not stick our fingers or tongues or forks into that thing, then who's going to protect us from ourselves? And again, you get down to the brass tacks, and this is the problem in a nutshell. And it's not a problem of guns. It's not a problem of defense. It's not a problem of anything other than the fact that there are no grown-ups anymore. There are no adults. No one has responsibility. The only people who can make a decision are the government. That's the only decisions that can be made anymore is law, legislation. That's the only decision. And I'll give you a great example of it. I have somebody who I've gotten to know recently who I admire very, very much, and his wife just recently had a second scare with a really nasty kind of cancer, and they got some good news lately on the MRI. But he was looking into a new form of treatment, and this is not an alternative medicine treatment. I'm just simply saying, as people do whatever you think works well for you. This is an extremely advanced Western medicine cancer-fighting therapy that uses stem cells. And if she is able to get on the list for treatment, which is this amazing medicine is done by American pharmaceutical companies, and if she manages to get on the testing list for this, it looks like they're going to have to go to Mexico to test her for this drug. So why does she have to go to Mexico to be tested for this drug? Well, because the Food and Drug Administration says that it takes 20 years and $100 million, or whatever the number is, in order for a drug to be passed so that you can use it in America. Now, I would simply ask you this. If you have a form of terminal cancer and somebody says to you that we have a therapy that has a 3% chance of survival, and most of the people have side effects that include unbearable agony and turning green and bleeding out of the eyes. But we have a 3% chance of survival above the statistical average in placebo and so on. If it were me, I would say I would like to take the chance, thank you. And as it turns out, this particular therapy has got a 100% success rate in a very, very small, statistically small sample. But in that small sample, the success rate is 100%. And if I was the person, or somebody I cared about was a person with that disease, and I found out the living truth, which is that my own government will not allow me to have this drug, even though I'm terminally ill, what the hell does that leave you? Where do you stay? How can you even be part of a country that's built that way? How can you call yourself proud to be an American when a government decides that even though you're terminally ill, and even though you're a full-grown adult, and even though you're willing to sign 200 release forms, you cannot have a chance to decide the outcome of your own life and have a chance to save your own life because some bureaucrat somewhere has decided, no, that's just not going to be a decision that you get to make. You don't get to make a decision about your own life like that or your own future. No, we'll make that decision, you see, because we're professional bureaucrats and we live in Washington and we want the power of life and death over people. It's why we got into government in the first place. How do you explain that to somebody? That, that yes, this drug may save your life. It may not, but it may. And we're not going to let you have the chance to do that. You can just go off there and die. And all of the rest of the people that come down with this condition in the next 20 years, you can all go off and die too, until we've decided that this drug is safe. Well, guess what? I don't care if it's safe. I don't care if it's safe. I'm already at the point, if I've got a life-threatening cancer, I don't care if the drug is safe. In fact, if they tell me that this drug is extremely dangerous, it doesn't affect my decision in the slightest. If it's a chance there and no chance here, I'm going with the chance. And again, it comes down to the fact that there are no adults anymore. No one's allowed to be responsible for their own lives. Why could you simply not, in America today, I understand about lawsuits and all the rest, why could you simply not sign a contract witnessed by 50 nuns and Democrats as well, if you want, and simply say, I, Bill Whittle, out of my own free volition and choice, hereby forfeit any right to legal, so on and so forth. I'm fully appraised of the risk. I fully understand the risk. And by signing this document, I forego any legal remedy whatsoever should this drug cause me harm. Okay, great. But that doesn't matter. You could sign that. They still won't let you do it. Because you're not an adult. Because you're not allowed to make a decision about your own life. That's the government's job. It's not your job. Same thing as with the schools. You're not responsible for finding out who these mass murderers are. You're certainly not responsible for defending yourself against them. That's the government's job. So, instead of arming yourself, or at the very least, instead of going and talking to law enforcement and school authorities when you're sitting next to a psychopath, much better to start a Twitter hashtag and then to write legislation and have a law passed that's not going to have any effect on anything other than to make you feel safer. Once you get to the point where you realize that life doesn't owe you anything, life gets so much simpler and happier too, by the way. Honestly, I think really when you get right down to it, all of the discussions about politics, funding, government, non-government, defense, all of it, mass shooting, all of it, it comes down to happiness, right? You want to be happy. You want to go through this life as a happy person. Okay. Now, if you accept the fact that sometimes bad things happen for no reason, if you accept the fact that you're responsible for your own safety, and if you accept the fact that you can just simply die at any single moment and there's not a damn thing that you can do about it, a brick can fall on your head. Or you can fall on a brick. It doesn't matter. Once you understand this, life is very, 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 very much more fun and enjoyable. I don't know how people go through life with the mindset that they seem to have. I don't know how they go through it. I'm just going to pick an example that I probably mentioned before. I'm just going to pick an example that I probably mentioned before. 'Cause I think it illustrates it. 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 'Cause I think it illustrates But I remember several different cases hearing Woody Allen talking about how he's terrified of death. He's absolutely, absolutely obsessed with it and terrified of it. And I'm not 100% sure of this, but I'd be willing to bet you everything I own and plus everything you own that Woody Allen has no belief in an afterlife or any religious beliefs whatsoever. So here's a man who is every single day deprived of the happiness that is built into any single day because of his terror of something that may or may not happen that day. May not happen for 10 years or 20 or 50. But in Woody Allen's case, it's not going to be 50. And to spend your entire life miserable because something is coming that you can't do anything about except to obsess about is genuine tragedy to me. Genuine, absolute tragedy. It, a coward dies 1,000 times, a brave man dies just once. It sounds like such a cliche. And for people who are cowards, and I used to be one, it's almost like meaningless. What does that do? How does that help me? Well, we've talked about this before on this show. There are some people that just simply will not talk about the idea of dying. They bounce off it like it's a hot. Don't even talk about it. I don't want to even talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I want to think about it. Well, you ought to think about it. I thought about it. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. There was some period, for some reason or another, when I was 16 or 17, I was extremely depressed. I was pretty sure I had some kind of cancer. And it turns out, of course, I didn't, but I thought I did. And I know I've said this many times before, but it's probably a message that bears repeating. When I had that moment in the glider, when I sat in back of a room of 300 people who are watching a movie that I made, when I've done all of these things that mean so much to me, hanging out with Burt Rutan at Oshkosh, all of these things. I look at these things and I go, this is a well-led life, man. This is the best you can possibly do. This is the best deal you're going to get. You have played your hand as well as it gets played. You're raking in all the chips. It doesn't matter if you have to leave the table eventually. You just done it well, and not done yet. I got a lot of things I want to do still. But honestly, Gadsden Barb says that Mark Ruby's attempting to educate and he's getting booed and students are putting their fingers in their ears. Yeah. So that's going to be a segue to our next topic, which is not, here I'll get to you in a minute there, Merlin. Let's just talk a little bit about today's college students and putting their fingers in their ears. I've become daily more convinced of this. The best thing that we can do for education is to accelerate the destruction of universities and public schools. That's not to say it didn't work. It worked magnificently. The American public school system for 200 years was the envy of the world, and the American university system was the engine of invention all around the world. And we need to accept the fact that those days are over. And we need to accept the fact that the internet and the destruction of the social fabric and all of the poison pills that come with social media and all of the progressive ideas about, self-esteem movement and so on has created a generation of monsters. They didn't create themselves, but that's what they are. Smug, self-satisfied people who, like all teenagers, and I was one of them and so were you, has for the first time in, I think, human history, certainly in this civilization, these children haven't had adults stand up to them and say, you're talking absolute nonsense, but that's what you're supposed to do when you're a teenager. You'll grow out of it. They become more militant. They become more vicious. They become more erratic and more dangerous. I saw a video, some of you may have seen a couple, I saw it just yesterday or the day before. It's a guy in a gun store, small little gun store someplace, and this giant Antifa Macy's Day balloon creature comes into the thing, and during the entire thing you can't tell if it's a male or female. And this Antifa jelly bean This is the kind of warrior they are. They call themselves warriors. This warrior, I don't think this warrior could I don't think this warrior could get over a wall that's waist high. The good news, by the way, about the destruction of the universities is it's the internet that's essentially caused all these social problems, and it's the internet that allows you to become educated better than anyone has ever been able to be educated in history. I ought to know I'm completely self-educated. I'm a college dropout, and I am interested in everything and the information of the entire human race, and grows by billions and billions of items every single day is available to me, and I use it because I know the right questions to ask. That's what you need to be teaching people now, is how to ask the right questions. So just parenthetically, I'll read something about the Battle of Cannae, let's say, or Scipio Africanus or something, and he lands, in his invasion of Carthage, and he lands in a promontory, 2 miles to the east of Utica. So now I can look up Utica on Google Maps, and I can look and see that promontory. I can go to a satellite view, and I can say, oh, that's where he went ashore. This kind of thing is very cool. So Eric Blake says, when I say shut it down, does it mean Hillside or Liberty? No, of course not. If as a matter of fact, I have to say this just flew into my head, but seriously, both Hillsdale and Liberty should be mega corporations now. There should be 100 Hillsdale campuses around the country, because there are people who still want their children to get educated. You're going to have to just do it on your own now. It can be done, but we'll have to figure that method out. But these kids are monsters. And in this video I was telling you about this. See, here's the thing about it was at least other revolutionaries, even in the 60s, even the 60s hippies and stuff, they at least had the guts to get into like physical confrontations. This creature comes into this arms dealership, into a small gun store. It's not an arms dealership, it's a little small gun store, tiny one. And his first question to the gun owner is, so do you sell these to kikes? And he said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I don't even know what that word means. Are you asking me, do I sell guns to Jews? Is that what you're asking me? Because that's a pretty obnoxious and offensive term to use. Well, yes, of course I do. I sell them to anybody who's interested in defending myself. Oh, it seems unusual for a Nazi. So they're just this creatures, this giant, put the Pillsbury Doughboy in a ninja outfit, and you pretty much get the idea. This thing sits in the middle room there, and then is looking around, and the guy's saying, I think you probably can just leave now. Mumbling. And as this butter creature gets to the edge of the door, says, what's this? And the owner of the gun says, that's a Bible. That's free. You feel free to have it if you want. Take one with you. If you want to burn it, that's your business. I don't care. They're free. Just help yourself. So this creature says, well, can I have all of them? The gun store guy says, sure, you can have all of them. So then this person goes outside the store, and in the parking lot in full view of the camera, starts smashing the Bibles against the ground and throwing them against cars and throwing them against the windows and so on. Then the guy calls the police, because now this person's, defacing the property. And the police come, and this creature comes back in the store and says, well, you said I could have them and I could do anything I want with them. I said, didn't say you could use them to destroy my property and other people's property. Person got arrested downtown. They went. I saw this. Let's be real clear on this, okay? I used to be this stupid myself. I saw this kid who was probably 17 years old or something, and Antifa sympathizer confronting like these Proud Boys or something like this, and this kid is saying, somebody says to him, well, listen, genius, you have to have something like this, or else how are you going to enforce the rules? And the kid said, well, why would you have to enforce the rules? Why would any rule that's worth having, you wouldn't have to enforce? I can remember being stupid enough to believe that kind of thing, that the whole thing's a giant misunderstanding, and that the only laws that are worth having are laws that everybody obeys, because according to this person, crime is simply a result of poverty and inequality. And so you don't really need any rules, except the rules to get rid of inequality and poverty. And no one's ever going to tell a lie, and no one's ever going to game the system, and no one's ever going to... In the minds of people like this, criminals are people who are stealing bread for their families, you know. That's how they see criminals. They see them as like people who are so disadvantaged because of the horrible racism of America and this horrific, nightmarish civilization that we live in. They're forced, family men and women all, forced to go out and maybe, you know, rob a convenience store so that they can get bread to feed their families, take an apple off of the cart, you know, before the pigs come and bust their heads. This is what they think. Because they're children, and they're not in any, they're not going to grow up. And that's also the core of the issue, right? A little while ago we were saying the problem with the country is there are no adults in the country anymore. Well, you think about it. If you want government control, if you're a progressive and you want to control other people's lives, when you would want to make sure that no one can control their own life. The only thing that control a person's life is the government. And since you're into politics, that means you, which means you get to control that person's life and your own life. You see how it works? Very simple, really, once you get down to basic motivations. And so if you want a society where everybody does what you tell them to do, ideally you want a society of children, right? That's what children do. Children do what you tell them to do. Adults think for themselves. And adults can say, I understand that drug is dangerous. Yes, I understand that. Well, it might kill you. Yes, I understand that. Yes. And it might make you very, very sick as well. Got it. I'm already very, very sick. Maybe you ought to be spending your efforts on, I don't know, like keeping poison out of the food supply, or maybe, you know, checking for salmonella in chickens, the kind of things that you were originally put in place to do, you know, rather than hold other people's lives in your hands. I'm not asking you, is this drug safe? I'm telling you, I know it's not been proven to be safe, and I'm willing to take this chance. But contracts don't mean anything anymore. Releases don't mean anything anymore. Liability is eternal. You know, there's a story from 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even longer, maybe 20 years ago, where some guy, I'm not fooling now, got roaring drunk into a Cessna, flew into a mountain in a rainstorm, upside down, roaring drunk, and they sued Cessna, and they won. There was a person whose son broke into a car lot, stole a car, and as they were joyriding around out of town, the thief got into a fatal auto accident, and the family of the thief sued the car dealer for not having had better security and preventative measures, that the car dealer had not fulfilled his obligation to prevent their son, the thief, from stealing a car and thereby hurting himself. This is the world we live in now, and that story's 15 years old. So when it comes to students and universities and all the rest of it, I've come to believe that everything we do to try and fight this is not only not going to work, but it's actually hurting. It's delaying the inevitable. It truly is lining up the lounge chairs on the Titanic, when in point of fact, we ought to be strapping together anything that floats and chucking it overboard and swimming for our lives, because this ship is going down, and that's what we need to understand. And even these monsters that even the progressive professors are terrified of now, even they know it, and it's gone. It's ruined. It's gone. There's some things that happen, and this is one of them. Would be nice if universities were still places to go to hear new opinions and open up your eyes and learn things that you didn't know before. But now they're places for you to go plug your ears and chant, and they can have it. They can have it. I don't owe those idiots anything other than to accelerate their contact with reality, because reality wins every time, and that's the ace in the hole for the rest of us. Yeah. All right. Moving on. I can go to 7:30, so maybe half an hour, some little more than that, something left. All right. So we have here Merlin Wondelbo. In light of the Russian indictments, my liberals are asking me why Trump has not sanctioned Russia like Congress has ordered him to, and the lack of said sanctions means it's because he's in cahoots with them. I have zero information on this, so could you please enlighten me? I'd be delighted to enlighten you, Merlin. This happens to be something I have inside information about. In 2008, when Putin decided he was going to have an adventure down in Georgia, the Obama administration imposed sanctions on Russia, and virtually every restaurant in Moscow went out of business and has been out of business for the last 8 years. The Russian people, and I know this to be true because I'm married to one of them, were so strongly in favor of Trump, just absolutely loved Trump because Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, and Barack Obama had been responsible for all of this agony. And so anti-Americanism now in Russia is even at an all-time high because they had such high hopes for Donald Trump. But when Putin decided to get clever in the Ukraine, Trump not only didn't lift the sanctions, he increased them. I have family now that I'm married into, and I've been married into family for 14 months now. And I can't visit that family, and they can't visit me because the United States and Russia have withdrawn tourist visas. There are doctors and violinists and musicians, orchestras, entire orchestras, comedy groups, all of these individual Russian people, organizations, high-level artists, all of this. They had to cancel their speaking engagements or their touring engagements in America because they cannot get a tourist visa out of the country. I don't get to see my daughter-in-law. I don't get to see my son-in-law. I don't get to see my mother-in-law because they cannot get a tourist visa into America. It all just went away. And the interview with immigration that I'm going to be having at the end of the month with my wife was supposed to happen in July. And the reason it hasn't happened since July is because the shutting down of relations and the damage to immigration with Russia has been so extensive that immigration simply doesn't know what to do. They don't know how to catch up. You can't even get into America from Russia on a tourist visa if you decide to go to Prague, let's say. You could, as a Russian, travel to Prague, but the American embassy in Prague will not give you a tourist visa if you're carrying a Russian passport, even if you're applying in Prague, or the Ukraine, or anywhere else for that matter. And my wife has told me stories, and many, many stories, about how life in Russia has essentially just simply for 10 years, 8 years now, 9 years, has grown to a halt. All of the advertising businesses are gone. That means things like wedding photography is mostly gone. 9 out of 10 restaurants are gone. All of these little businesses are simply gone. The first thing my wife said when she came to America, I mean the first thing, was how nice people were. And the second thing she said was, I can't believe how busy all these restaurants are. There's lines here to go and sit down here. Everybody, these places are packed. I said, yeah, it was like that before these sanctions were put in place by Obama. And she was here for Trump's election, but she talks to her family and my family and her friends, and they're my friends now too, talks to them every day, and every day it gets worse and worse and worse over there. people do not appreciate the power that an American embargo or sanctions has. They simply can't do business. It's the international currency. Still, although I think those days are probably numbered now. They simply can't do anything. I have a son-in-law who works as an editor, of all things, a video editor, and he worked for his production company for 7 months without a single paycheck, waiting for these sanctions to be lifted, and they didn't. So finally they just closed the building down. They coasted as long as they could. How was she able to come to America? Asked known miscreant Matt Lloyd. Well, it's simple, Matt. She came here in September. Well, she came to visit in the end of July and early August. She moved here permanently middle of September of 2016. And we've talked about this many times. It makes our blood run cold. I suspect that if I had met her 4 months later, then we simply would not have met. It just wouldn't have happened. About 3 or 4 months after she came here, intensifying these restrictions happened. So this idea that Donald Trump is just, kissing Putin's butt and that Russia is just, got the guy they wanted and they're just, happy as can be, is just nuts. I know the Russian people wanted Donald Trump because they liked the fact that he was a straight talker. And the whole long shot idea not only appealed to them, they actually were mystified by it. They absolutely thought that in the election year of 2016, the Russian people, hearing this from not just my wife, by the way, but from a number of Russian people, thought the whole idea of a President Trump was kind of cool, but at the same time just so patently impossible. Not ridiculous, just impossible. Impossible. You just don't fight that kind of power structure and win. When he won that election, my wife was astonished. 2 days before, she said, Billy, there's too much money and too much power. You can't stop these things. People make these decisions, and they've decided that Hillary's going to be the president, so that's it. And then the American people just decided to say, not yet, still, that day may come, but it is not this day. So, is it Dewey DeBoer? Hope I got that right, Dewey. Says the same thing about the sanctions in Cuba. You go to Havana now, and you'll see people driving 59 Studebakers in 2017. And the reason that they drive Studebakers in 2017 is because America's had sanctions on them since 1959, and simply it's not even a stasis field. It's the Stone Age. So much for that argument. By the way, if you really get down to it, Hillary Clinton sold Russia 25% of the total U.S. uranium supplies. Hillary Clinton is so corrupt, she sold 25% of America's uranium supplies to Russia. Well, I should say she allowed the deal to go through as Secretary of State, in exchange for which she got $100 million, Bill got a $850,000 speaking engagement, or something like that. But those two things aren't connected in any way, needless to say, because that would be corruption, and that'd be wrong. So if I'm Putin, I want the money-grubbing hillbillies, right? Who'll do anything for a buck. I don't want the guy who's suddenly telling guys at CENTCOM, oh, no, you go right ahead and take out that convoy. You just go right ahead. We're not going to drop leaflets on these bastards, giving them 45 minutes warning like Obama did. We're fighting a war against these guys. I got pretty close in Syria a couple times. It still gets pretty close every now and then. Obama vacated the Middle East. Putin moved in. Russia was a player in the Middle East for the first time in 40 years. And And next thing you know, Donald Trump's back in the game. So which one do you think they want? There's a better point here, though, Merlin. And this was brought up by a friend of mine who said, what if all this Russian interference, which I must interrupt to say, listen, if you think that Russia false news stories through the election, what possible impact do you think that the entire left-wing bias of the entire news industry does? It's 30 points of bias. Russians didn't throw the election. Even if everything that they said is true, and I don't think any of it's true, but even if everything they said it was true, they might have swung a point or two back towards Trump from the 30 points that CNN is giving to Obama and Clinton by handing her debate questions in advance and not talking anything about Benghazi or the fact that she stood in front of all these people and lied. Even when Comey, that woman should have been in jail. The director of the FBI spends 45 minutes saying why she should have been in jail and then basically says, but we don't recommend prosecution. In a country with a news media, you would have thought that a reporter would have said, at the very least, Mrs. Clinton, even though you're speaking to us from not behind bars, which is an outrage, you'd think somebody would have said, you stood up on camera, and here's the footage of you denying that you ever put secret documents on there. You're saying that none of them were classified. You're saying you didn't know any of them were. And the FBI director has just admitted that everything that you told us in that speech is an absolute lie. You want to address that since you're not going to jail over it? Please. But my friend's point was, what if Russia's doing all this? Actually, I think is an interesting point. What if Russia's doing all of this stuff, playing both sides against each other and using social media to further divide the country into increasingly hostile, increasingly disgusted, increasingly vehement echo chambers where half the country hates the other half so much? Maybe the Russian goal is to give both sides evidence that the other side is cheating in order to quicken this falling apart that's happening right now in front of our eyes, just dividing right down the middle. I think there's some actual merit to that argument, to be honest with you. Here's looks like a new face. Extremely awesome picture. Serious Civil War, James Longstreet kind of sunglasses, not beer, sunglasses, American flag in the background. Awesome. Ian Little. Hey, Ian, good to have you here. Writes, when it comes to the culture war, we are merely in a new phase of the old culture war that's been going on for decades. Are we merely in a new phase of the same old culture war that's been going on for decades, or a brand new culture war with newly redrawn lines and largely different set of issues? It's a really interesting question. I think, Ian, the best way to think of it is, no, it's the same war, and it's the same soldiers, and it's the same generals, and it's the same countries, and it's even the same uniforms, but the weapons are different. It's like forever war. Or imagine if the Civil War simply never ended. And I don't mean an armistice. Let's just say that it simply was going on now, 150 years later, 160 years later, whatever. The Civil War is still continuing. We're still at war with the Confederacy. And now we're using AR-15s instead of, muskets and Springfield, or mini balls and Enfields or whatever they were using. I used to know that. Springfield? Were they Springfield muskets? In any event, we're no longer using rifled mini balls, and we're no longer using Gatling guns. Now we're using AR-15s, and we're using cluster bombs, and we're still fighting the Confederacy, and our uniforms are still blue, and theirs are still gray, and we're still at it. But now we're using smart bombs and all the rest of it. That's how it feels to me. The culture war used to consist of hippies rolling around in the mud and passing joints and sticking flowers in the barrels of National Guardsmen's rifles, and now they consist of late-night comedians and social media and ownership and the destruction of education, not just educational facilities, but education in general. The whole idea of education has essentially been completely discredited. It doesn't exist anymore. Just the fact that students are lobbying to keep speakers off of campus is an indication that not just the university is destroyed, but the whole idea of education is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So, yeah. I wish I had more to add to it than that, but honestly, I really think that's it. We're still fighting against people who understand that America, based as it is on individuality, is the last remaining obstacle to controlling everybody the way that they want to. There are people who are born with this defective chromosome that makes them want to tell other people what to do and is not willing to simply lead the lives that they want to lead them. Other people have to lead their lives the way they want them to be led. And this country was always the greatest opponent to that. And in the years after World War II, it looked like we won. And we did win. We never realized that the enemy wasn't going to be fascism, and it wasn't even really going to be communism. Because these socialists on college campuses, these communists on teaching Harvard and socialism and Bernie, all the rest of it, they're not real communists. Bernie Sanders has 3 houses. Bernie Sanders isn't a socialist. He calls himself a socialist because it works. And it's a way to convince weak-minded people that you're a good guy and give them all the money and the power you never could have gotten with a real job. But they're not really communists. What they are is just soft, bored, weak, self-hating, spoiled children who have finally figured out that the way to win is to use our own decency against us and eliminate the entire idea of decency and normalcy. When I say normalcy, look, when I say that the idea of being normal has been eliminated, I think that's a bad thing. But that doesn't mean that I think that gay people or trans people need to be consigned to a closet someplace and have to live their lives in fear no. I don't. You're perfectly welcome to live your life any way you want to. It doesn't affect me, and as long as it doesn't affect me, rock on. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. But to say that the opinions or the conditions or the preferences of 1/2 of the population have to be applied to the rest of the population, otherwise it's Auschwitz, is just nuts. It's nuts. You know? Normalcy is a useful term. Forcing people to be into what is called normalcy is not good, but I've never been in favor of that. Certainly, my life as a wandering minstrel has never been about anything other than basically just living your life the way you want to and just going out and doing it, and that's what I think is great. But to pretend that these outlying positions on anything must become the norms of society because otherwise, we're just putting on the armbands. It's totalitarianism is what it is. It's just tyranny. It's a tyranny of the minority. I saw a trailer for some movie. It was not too long ago. It's a coming of age film. A coming of age film of a young gay man or boy really who's trying to deal with his homosexuality. And I thought, wow, that is truly shocking and provocative concept. What a daring and risky film that would be in 1961. But at the end of that trailer, they have this little scene where all of these young people shock their parents, where a series of quick cuts where they say, "Mom, I'm straight," and they all burst into tears, and the parents are screaming and yelling, and that's okay. I get it, but there's a line in there that basically says, it's the character's voice saying, "Why is it that we gay people have to be the ones to prove ourselves as why is it that gay people have to be the minority?" Something along those lines. It's like, why aren't heterosexual people the ones who have to prove that they're normal or something like that, which is, again, it's an argument that an 8-year-old might make, you know. Love Simon, that's it. Thank you. T-Dog Lies. Why is it that that gay people have to be the ones who are the minority? Why can't straight people be the minority? That's basically what they're saying. And again, it sounds good if you're a 20-year-old child, but when you get down to it, it's one of those ridiculous, absurd questions like, what happens when the irresistible force meets the immovable object? The question's impossible. It's absurd on its face. You can't discuss this question because the question's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. The presence of an immovable object means that there's no irresistible force. The presence of an irresistible force means there's no immovable object. They're definitionally excluding each other. It's like saying, why is it that the minority has to prove that they're the minority when it should be up to the majority to prove that they're the minority? You just want to pat them on the head, you know, and send them off to the crayons and maybe give them a little bottle of milk for the petting zoos and then go out and play with the goats or something. Honestly, well, but this is the world. So more and more I become convinced that it's no longer about stopping this. It's about preserving. It's about preserving this thing that comes and goes and comes and goes and comes and goes and pretty quickly seems to be going. So yeah, I think it's a triage time for me. It's like, okay, there's nothing I can do about this gigantic, huge bulk of these people out there who are so intentionally ignorant that they simply put their fingers in their ears. I can't do anything about that. I'd like to, but I can't. And likewise, I don't have to worry about people like you who not only get it, but who I learn so much from pretty much every day for one way or another. And so you have to say those people are going to die. I'm talking about their ideas. I'm not talking about them personally, but their philosophy and their entire value system is terminal, and we can't save them. So we have to stop wasting resources on trying to convince them of that. Likewise, in triage, the people who are already on our team are suffering from minor wounds, cuts and scratches, and they don't need immediate medical treatment. They'll survive for days or weeks or whatever. So let's concentrate all our efforts on the people we can save. Because some people we can work on and not be able to save, and other people don't need us on them right now working on them. So let's just triage this whole thing and save what we can, save as much of it as we can, button it down, and, go. Dave Wellman says that being heterosexual is biologically superior. I can only imagine the kind of things that Media Matter is going to make out of that, Dave. But it's true that it's biologically superior because if you talk about biology, you're talking about reproduction. It's just that simple. It's what biology is. There's so much I disagree with Richard Dawkins about, but in The Selfish Gene, he basically said it may be more useful to think of people as simply just machines that your genetic code inhabits over a series of generations, because it's the code that gets passed down. Interesting way of thinking about things. But yes, biologically, you want to reproduce, and that means that heterosexuality is biologically superior to homosexuality because biologically homosexuality is a dead end. Which brings up an interesting point that I think Jeremy Boring first raised. And he said, and this is really quite fascinating, he said that if you have the kind of permissive society that we have now, and if homosexuality is a genetic feature, and it seems to be, because I can't imagine making that decision or changing my mind about it's not something I think I'll be gay today. So if it turns out it is a genetic outcome, his point is that in an extremely open society, what you're essentially doing is you're breeding the homosexuality gene out. Because if it is a genetic component to it, then it's only by repressing homosexuality and forcing homosexuals into heterosexual relationships for the sake of appearances that that gene gets passed on. How many gay men have had children prior to, the 70s or 80s? Lots of them. They were as gay as today's homosexuals are, but they were forced by society into sham heterosexual marriages and had a bunch of children. And if homosexuality is genetic, then, and that's what they're claiming, right? They're claiming it's not a choice. So if that's true, then by not forcing people into the closet, which I'm 100% in favor of, by the way, is not forcing people into the closet. But if it turns out that's true, then the heterosexual genetic component, if it's there, disappears from the gene pool. Just a thought. So anyway, one more. Hey, it's our friend Dave Olson. We didn't get a chance to talk about the official portraits of the Obamas that were released last week. Released, hell, they escaped, well said. His was a perfect metaphor. He's poorly proportioned while sitting on his ass in front of his idea of government, kudzu, poison ivy, and pot. He was amateurish and locked. Hers was amateurish and looked like she'd been adorned with the covering that came with my high school hoopty 1979 Triumph TR7. They'd have been better off if they'd used the artiste who did a painting of the Virgin Mary using elephant dung. Say what you will about the policies of FDR, his official portrait is magnificent. Can today's art and the art of the future be saved from the artists? Wow. We did do a right angle about that. And I think I called that one, I think it was called, Really? One look at the artist on stage wearing his, I don't want to call it a clown suit because, I don't have any desire to offend clowns. But as far as his is concerned, one look at the artist shows you that he's a very avant-garde artist, you see. And so Obama had to have a portrait that sets him apart from everybody else. He was sold to us, you may remember this, as simply being a qualified man for the job who happened to be black. He was sold to us as the person who was going to bring racial integration to America because he was going to be a black president, and it wasn't about him being black. And the second he got elected, from the instant forward, and even before then, obviously, it's all about, look at me, I'm a black president. And so his portrait is absurd. And it's not just absurd because it's different. It's just bad. The face is rendered very well. I think the face is really quite a good likeness of him. But if you look at the portrait, he wanted something different and striking, and that's what he got. He got a very, very poor rendition that wasn't designed to be presidential. It was designed to be anti-presidential. It was designed to, if you see all of the other portraits lined up in a gallery, what Obama wanted was he wanted you to come to him and just go, whoa, wait a minute. Take Obama out of it. Put Ronald Reagan in that chair. And all of a sudden you're going through 26, 27, 29, 30, 40, 41. You go, what? It's not a good what. The Kennedy portrait is a good what. The portrait of Kennedy is shocking and different, grabs your attention. But it's a very, very interesting and bold choice. Because it's not screaming at you with primary colors and subversive. That's Dave Wellman's term, exactly right. It's not screaming at you subversive. The portrait of Kennedy with his arms crossed looking down is a portrait. How do you not look at that picture and not think of Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that? I mean, that's an interesting take. The color and the composition doesn't grab you and yank you out of your chair, but the there's a great deal of audacity in having a portrait where the person's not looking at the camera at all. In fact, you just basically barely make out his face. You're looking at his hair, which is excellent hair, by the way. And I ought to know. So look at the portrait of Obama, and you'll realize that a bunch of things just they not only don't make sense. It's just plain lack of ability. It's just lack of talent. That's all there is to it. It's just lack of talent. Look at the picture closely. You'll see his face is done rather well, actually, very well. You look at his hands. One of his hands has got a fold in it that makes it look like he's got six fingers on one hand. But more importantly, look at the way he's sitting on the chair. The chair is coming out at an angle, and Obama's entire body is at like 45 degrees to the angle of the chair. If you just look at it carefully, you realize that he's hanging out of the chair, that the chair's this way, and he's kind of leaning that way, and it's not like he's turned in the chair either. And most striking to me, aside from all of the Photoshop cloned foliage, which is, again, a sign of a lazy artist. Oh, there's Dave Wellman again. Portrait was lazy. Yes, lazy. He basically cloned the background, didn't paint individual flowers, painted a bunch of them, then photoshopped them and copied them out. That's lazy. The perspective is lazy. The hand is lazy and also lack of talent. But the most remarkable thing about that painting is the lighting and the perspective on the background doesn't change. In other words, if you look at the painting, it's like Obama's chair has been stuck into a wall of ivy on two steel rods, and that he's floating above it. It's not like his feet are on the ground, and then the background makes a turn from the vertical to the horizontal where the chair sits. It's all vertical, and the chair is just floating in space like that. And, I'm sure, by the way, I don't think he's terribly enamored with it. However, you can see from the pictures of Michelle with her portrait that she's just plain furious. She's just furious. You just look at the pictures of her at the unveiling. You just look at she's got the exact same expression on her face that she had when Barack was texting with that cute Danish prime minister or whatever. That kind of look like her portrait looks like the absolute national prize winner for portraiture in the 12 and under category. And it goes again to the idea that all show and no substance, right? Oh, look, wow, what a really different and vibrant and amazing, bold choice it is. It's not. It's bad art disguised as different, I guess. I got to fly, folks. I'm sorry. It's a little early, but I got to run. So I got about the same amount of show. We just didn't get so much preamble this time. It's always good to be here. Thanks again for watching and all the rest of that stuff. We'll be back next week, I think. I don't think I'm going anywhere. If I am, I'll be back the week after that. But until then, again, always... until then, thanks again for the members for your continuing support. I really should stop calling you members now. I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. You're actually patrons. Is a much better term, really. Patrons, people who again and again and again say, look, we don't really want the members-only shows. We want everybody to see it. That's a patron of the arts and patrons of democracy and freedom. Very grateful as always. So thank you very much for that as always. And that'll do it for 178. Until next time, I'm your host, Bill Whittle. You be careful out there, and it's time for me to push the button.